Today, on episode 43 of the Stoic Strength Trainer podcast, having the confidence of your convictions. Does it ever occur to you that other people may disapprove of what you do? Or that others think poorly of you for the choices that you're making? Let's take a look at what may be going on here. All right, welcome to the show. I'm Corey Samuelson. Conformity. Conforming to group think. That sounds like a bad thing. Much better to think for yourself and walk the unbeaten path. That's how we imagine the hero going about life. There are consequences to both, and we're going to look at that today. So this is Gymchiridion 35. Begin quote. Have the confidence of your convictions. Do what you believe to be excellent. If you have determined that eating less protein will suit your purpose, then be about it. Your workout partners mock you? Endure. You know you are acting consistent with your well-reasoned conclusions. That others see it as wrong makes no difference. Now, what if you conclude you are acting wrongly? It's in the moment of having realized the error of your thinking that your behavior must change. You can never have done anything other than what you believed to be right. You can always choose to do something else the moment your understanding changes. End quote. There were a fascinating number of experiments done by Solomon Asch in the 1950s. In these experiments, there was a group of people that were basically part of the experiment, and then one lone individual that didn't know what was going on. And they were we'll say the subject. So if you imagine this group of people with the one subject, and the group is acting as if they're just part of the experiment as well. And then the experimenter would show lines on a projector. I'm not exactly sure of the details, if it was on a screen or how they did it. But these people were shown lines of varying lengths. And generally, if you're looking at a bunch of lines, you can tell if they're arranged very orderly. You can just look at it and see, oh yeah, that's the longest line. Those two are the same length. This one's the shortest, whatever it is, right? And what the experimenter did was they asked, the group, including that one subject, which line is the longest? And they would go through one by one, asking, which line do you see as the longest? And somebody would say A, and then somebody else would say, oh, it's A, and then finally the subject. And then they were giving their opinion. Okay, yeah, I see that it's A. As the slides or the projections were going up, however, as part of the experiment, the group would start to say the wrong line. So even though it was clearly line C that was the longest, everyone individually within the group, and they're part of that peer pressure, that conformity, they would say A is the longest, even though C is the longest. And then finally, the subject, having heard every single other person in the group say the wrong line, it turned out that nearly 75% of the subjects in these experiments went along with the wrong answer. And when they tabulated all the results, it turned out that the subjects would conform to the incorrect group answer almost 1/3 of the time. When they were asked why they went along with the group. Most of the subjects said that they knew that they were giving the wrong answer. In other words, they were going along with the group and not saying what they knew was the longest line. Most of them just said that they didn't want to risk facing the poor opinions or the ridicule of the group. A few of them, however, said that they actually thought, geez, if everyone else is picking line A when I think it's line C, and their senses are telling them C is the longest line, but everyone else is saying A, well, I guess I'm just wrong. And that's pretty interesting. In the experiments, they actually played with some of the details. So if there was just the subject in the room with one other person who then represented the group, conformity went way down. So in other words, it's much easier to not conform to one person. So if that first person, who again is part of the experiment themselves, is saying, oh, line A is longer, even though it's clearly line C, there isn't much pressure from one person's opinion. The larger the group, the more likely it was that the subject would conform to the group. Also, they played with social status. However they did that, I didn't really dig into the research on this, but they made the group higher status somehow. And in those instances, when you're watching people, if I were the subject and I was watching people who I considered to be at a higher station in life, or they had higher status in society, and they were giving the wrong answer as a group, chances are I would just say, I'm just going to go with what they think. And there's a lot of really interesting details on the research if you want to look it up. Just Google conformity experiments. And Asch, from Solomon Asch, is spelled A-S-C-H. So those conformity experiments, really, really interesting. And it does apply to a lot of what we do in society as we go about our lives. But that doesn't make conformity a bad thing. So an example that pops into my mind almost immediately is traffic and driving. Whatever country you live in, there are rules. There is one side of the road where you should be driving, and if everyone conforms and stays on the correct side of the road, stops when the traffic light tells them to stop, goes when the traffic light allows them to go, and follows all the rules, then everything's great, barring accidents and errors of judgment. Traffic flows smoothly, and people drive to work, come home, everyone's safe. In those instances, conformity is a good thing. And there are many other situations where when everyone conforms and does what the group agrees, yeah, these are good ideas, we should all do this, society flows smoothly. It's those moments, however, where you draw your own conclusions, where there are no rules stipulated by anyone. Stuff like, how do you want to live your life? What do you want to do in this great big world that we live in? How can you live the way that you want to live? In those instances, opinions of what, people in quotes should do varies from individual to individual. Now here, there will be groupthink on that, cultural values, family values. So wherever more than one person is, there's going to be opinions that may run counter to what the individual holds. But other than just that peer pressure, there's no reason to go along with what people are thinking. It's not a matter of safety like the traffic laws. It's not a matter of, well, you have to do it this way because that's what reality tells you. Like to get from point A to point B, you can run, you can walk, you could drive, you could ride a bike. You could crawl, you could lay on your back and kind of shimmy your shoulder blades. Like I'm just coming up with ridiculous examples here. You could roll like a log. There's nothing that says this is how it must be done. In Stoic philosophy, there are 4 virtues: wisdom, justice, courage, and temperance or self-control. Courage is associated with endurance. And the thing is that endurance is only needed when there's something to endure. So if you imagine the lonely researcher who is trying to create something. So back in the day when electricity was new and products were being created to make use of this. So the story about Thomas Edison and the light bulb and how he tried all these different filaments and he failed hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of times. Undoubtedly, he was ridiculed because, oh, look, he failed again. He's still failing. He's just continuing to fail. And when people asked him, like, how did you keep going despite all this failure and all this ridicule? Well, he just said, I didn't see it as failure. I just saw it as a step forward. So, hey, that doesn't work. Let's try this instead. And people say that he was exhibiting courage and a great level of endurance in the face of public ridicule and the actual physical results of his own failed experiments. The thing is that he may not have experienced any of that. He may have just completely ignored the public opinion. He may have been at complete peace with failing another experiment. I'm sure it was frustrating, but at the same time, he might have just been like, oh man, this is exciting. I'm on the verge of something here. When you have the confidence of your convictions, you no longer need courage. That you need to endure criticism isn't a factor. None of that matters because that's not how you experience other people's opinions or that group think or that pressure to conform. It's like being inside when there is a raging snowstorm outside. If you open the door and step out into the storm, yeah, you have to endure it. You have to have the courage to walk into wind chill factor and driving sleet or whatever you imagine a really bad winter storm would be. But if you just close the door and let the storm rage outside, and you're inside, you're comfortable, you're warm, you can peacefully go about your business. And the storm can rage. And as far as your experience is concerned, it's not happening in a way, if you get my meaning. I mean, obviously the storm is happening. So dropping the metaphor, people may be criticizing you. People may think poorly of you. But when you have the courage of your convictions, when you know this is the right thing to do, I know why I'm doing it, I believe that this is the excellent choice, then what others think stops making any difference. It stops having an impact. So it's more important that you convince yourself that you're making the excellent choice. You don't need to convince anybody else. If you've done your research, if there's research involved, if you've just sat and thought about it, and you know your values, and you know what you want to do, then you don't have to convince anyone else. You don't need to explain yourself to other people. There was an interesting twist in one of the conformity experiments that Solomon Asch put on in the 1950s that I've already spoken about here. And it was that if one of the group that was in on it with the experimenter, if just one of them, when everyone else was giving the wrong answer, when one person in that group gave the right answer, then that provided, I'll put it this way, it gave the subject, remember the one who wasn't in on it, the courage to not conform to the vast majority of the rest of the group. Just that one other person to say, actually, it's line C. Then the subject had the courage to say, yeah, it's C as well. So if you think about it like that, if you have the courage to live your convictions, you may actually be empowering someone else who is looking to think differently than the group. Not as a response, not as a, well, I just want to be different, but because they have been thinking about life. They've been thinking about what they want to do or the goals they want to achieve. And the group thinks differently. Most people are doing what they do. You know, that's why we have social norms and that kind of thing. If you think of it this way, others may be looking to you as an example of someone who has the courage to think for themselves, to take responsibility for their own experience, and to not just conform for conforming's sake because it's easier, because I don't want to ruffle any feathers, I just want to get along, it's just easier that way. You may be enough for someone else to see as an example so that they can have more courage. And in the beginning, the individual that is conforming, when you have the courage of your convictions, they may, just like the group, ridicule you, put a little peer pressure on you, maybe joke around and say, what do you think you're doing there? But they're just, if you think of it this way, they're just testing the courage that you have. They're challenging your beliefs. And if you just cave and say, yeah, you're right, that was silly, I don't know what I was thinking, I'll just get back in line here and follow the crowd. They were actually hoping that you did have the courage of your convictions. Sometimes it takes confidence and courage to make the excellent choice in the face of peer pressure, in the face of what the group thinks. And this could be just a couple of friends. It could just be parents. And even if you're an adult child with a couple of parents who disapprove, perhaps, or at least are trying to push you in a certain direction that they believe would be better for you. Whatever the size or the nature of the group that you are a part of, when you think about your own life and you draw your own conclusions and you have your own reasons for wanting what you want, when you believe that you are making the excellent choice, it can sometimes take that confidence, that courage to enact those choices. And when you absolutely know it is the excellent choice, the need for that confidence and that courage quite often will dissipate. And it's as if, that metaphor of that storm, it's as if the storm has died and now it's clear skies, mild weather. Because as far as you're concerned, the peer pressure, the groupthink, the criticism, it's irrelevant because you know you've got that confidence. And it's not the confidence in retaliation of anything. It's just, this is the right thing for me to do right now. And that anyone else thinks otherwise doesn't matter. And by living your excellence, you're not only changing the world, through your actions, but you are providing an example of what living with excellence looks like for someone else that you may not even be aware is watching and paying attention. And they may be one of those people in that group that you think is putting that pressure on you to change, to come back, to not be on the path that you're on. But they're secretly hoping that you do have the confidence of your convictions and that you stay on your path, because to them, you are the example and they want you to succeed so that they see that it's possible to think for oneself and to take responsibility for one's own experience and to break free from the group when it makes sense to do that. That's the end of another episode of the Stoic Strength Trainer podcast. If you like what you heard, please do share it with someone that you believe might like it too. This is Corey. If even one more person learns to operate with excellence in the moment of choice, the world will have become a better place. Catch you next time.